So your testosterone levels will be highest in the morning. So right now it's like around 11:30. So they'll still be really high. And then they gradually decline as you go toward the end of the day. So you're on a 24-hour testosterone cycle, whereas women and people with periods, their hormonal cycle is anywhere between 21 to 35 days.
Welcome back to the 101 podcast with Serena Organics, where we talk all things health and wellness with myself, David, and my fellow co-founder, Joe.
Hello. And today we have with us Lanice Brothers. Lanice, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. Now, Lanice, you are a yoga teacher and nutritionist specializing in women's health, hormones, and menstrual cycles.
Yes.
Now, this is a very interesting topic, I guess, for myself and David, because we never really delved on this type of topic on the podcast today. So we're looking very forward to having a conversation with you.
I'm excited to be here.
Well, thank you so much. How about we dive straight in? Tell us a little bit about you, who you are, what it is you do, and kind of what's taking you on this journey of yoga, nutrition, and talking so much about menstrual cycles, which is a great conversation to be able to have.
Yeah, so I guess you could say my origin story. I'm very into superheroes, Marvel, and all of that. I have a 9-year-old son, and we watch all of those together. So my origin story is that when I first got my period, it was extremely heavy, extremely painful, and I kind of fumbled around with all of it, trying to figure out what to do. I thought it was normal because that's what I saw of my mom and my grandmother having these really terrible experiences. And then eventually we went to the doctor, and I was giving birth control and very heavy painkillers, and kind of said, off you go, this is normal, you just have to deal with it. And I didn't really take the birth control properly because I was 15 at this point, and I was just, a child. And took the painkillers for a long time and tried to figure out, what was going on with my body, like trial and error over a number of years. And then in parallel, I moved to the UK. I started working in advertising, worked in advertising for 15 years. Lots of travel, lots of stress, just very high pressure. And I thought to myself, I can't keep doing this. It's not sustainable. At that point, I was pregnant. So I thought, okay, what am I going to do instead? And then I kind of started thinking, well, am I going to be a PT? I've always been really interested in health and well-being. And eventually decided to retrain as a nutritionist. And that was a 3-year course, and did that while I was working in advertising still. And then I decided, well, actually, what am I going to specialize in? And thinking about what I was not only familiar with, but really passionate about. And when they're writing a book, they say, well, write what you know. And I started thinking about my own story. And at first I thought, okay, well, actually, why don't I specialize in gut health? Because I still find that incredibly fascinating. But then I thought, well, actually, wouldn't it be really interesting to specialize in women's health, and specifically menstrual health and hormones? Because at that time, there weren't as many people doing that. It was still very much like, oh, these periods are like something that, are a bit of a taboo. They're a bit shameful, a bit dirty. So I thought, okay, that will be really interesting to specialize in, not just drawing on my own experience, but drawing on my passion, and my passion to help other people not have to experience what I did. And so that's how I got to where I am today. Set up my practice, then I retrained as a yoga teacher, wrote a book called You Can Have a Better Period, and I also have a podcast called Period Story.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That sounds like you've gone on an amazing journey that was born from you going through a situation which makes you qualified to really be able to understand, because it comes from a personal experience.
Yeah.
And I guess I mean, it's me not being a woman myself, but I guess conversations that we have with people sometimes is very much quite similar, where they're giving a lot of medication or painkillers to manage the pain. And I guess that in itself is a misconception, because through our conversations even before this, you're explaining how it doesn't have to be like that. And I guess going on that journey, what would you say are some of the common myths and misconceptions about menstrual cycles and period cramps that people have that can be tested really?
Yeah, so I think the first one, just going back to what we were talking about around pain, is that periods are supposed to be painful, and that, you just have to just take loads of Nurofen, loads of painkillers, and that's just the way it is until your periods finish. And it really doesn't have to be that way. Thinking about, someone who every period is really painful, they're taking loads of Nurofen or even cocodamol, codeine, that's going to have a knock-on effect on many aspects of their health, including their immune system, because if they're taking all of these painkillers, it's reducing the master antioxidant, which is glutathione. And it's kind of like a vicious cycle where you have less glutathione, so it means that your immune system doesn't necessarily have everything it needs in order to support you when your periods are painful, and then that cycle persists. And so something like this, CBD, is great because it helps to break that cycle where you're able to build up your antioxidant levels and get to the place where your body is less in a state of chronic inflammation, which exacerbates painful periods. So that's the first myth, is that periods are supposed to be painful. The next myth is that this is actually really interesting given the kind of conversations that are happening right now. Like McCall just did that program around the pill last week. And the idea that we don't necessarily need to have a menstrual cycle. That's a myth, a misconception that I hear a lot. Oh, just take the pill, suppress your menstrual cycle, suppress ovulation. You don't need it until you get pregnant. And even if you don't want to get pregnant, you don't need to have a period or a menstrual cycle until you finish having them, and then go on to HRT, and that's it. So it's this kind of like end-to-end kind of medical approach. And what people don't realize is that when you're not ovulating, let me take a step back, actually.
I'm just like...
I'm getting into the weeds. I'm like passionate and I'm getting into the weeds a little bit.
Please do.
I'm starting to take mental notes and I'm like, okay.
Yeah. So I talked about ovulation. We have 4 phases to our menstrual cycle. So everyone thinks, the period, and that's it. And then if you're trying to get pregnant, then you discover ovulation. If you didn't learn about it in school or you forgot about it. And ovulation is the midway point through the menstrual cycle, and that's where you make a lot of your hormones. So progesterone is this calming, anti-inflammatory hormone. And when we make progesterone, it has a massive effect on things like anxiety and pain. And then you then go into the cycle of, you have your period, then you have the next phase, which is the follicular phase, then you ovulate, and then it's the final phase, the luteal phase, and then that cycle, it goes around and around. And that's anywhere between 21 to 35 days. And the period is the first phase of that. Are you with me?
I'm with you.
Yeah. And that's anywhere between 3 to 7 days. And what's super interesting about this is if you compare this to a male hormonal cycle, so your testosterone levels will be highest in the morning. So right now it's like around 11:30. So they'll still be really high, and then they gradually decline as you go toward the end of the day. So you're on a 24-hour testosterone cycle, whereas women and people with periods, their hormonal cycle is anywhere between 21 to 35 days, because you have progesterone, then you have estrogen, and then you have follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, and testosterone. And all of these 5 hormones, they rise and fall throughout the menstrual cycle. And then when you suppress all of that, you don't get the benefit of these hormones. So something like progesterone, which I mentioned earlier, is so anti-inflammatory. And you'll be familiar through CBD with the benefits of reducing chronic inflammation. When we suppress ovulation through something like the pill or the Depo-Provera shot, we don't get the benefit of progesterone. So I have women coming to me saying, why do I feel so depressed in the last kind of 2 weeks of my menstrual cycle? And then we dig deeper, we find out, they're not actually ovulating and they're not making progesterone. So it's a myth, to kind of circle back to where we started. One of the myths I see is that, and I hear, is that we don't need to have menstrual cycles.
Well, it sounds like a lot more complex cycle for a female than it is for a male.
Yes.
Daily.
Yeah.
This is 21 to 35 days, you're saying. So it's interesting for us to be learning from a male perspective, and thank you for sharing that as well, because there's a lot of detail there that I didn't know beforehand.
Yeah.
You were touching on, obviously, the pain aspect being quite a large part of the management side for females going through their menstrual cycle. Obviously, you were suggested to take things like cocodamol, which we know comes with a lot of side effects, can make you feel very groggy. It's not really ideal if you want to be focused and going about your day. How would you best propose women manage their menstrual cycle from a pain management perspective?
Yeah, so managing their period. So in terms of the menstrual cycle, there are 2 points where I see women experiencing pain. So some women, they have painful periods, and then some women have really painful ovulation. And so what I talk about a lot is having like a pain toolkit that you can access. So maybe it's, you have things in your bag, you have things at home, and things that I always suggest including in that toolkit are CBD, but also different types of CBDs. So a nice balm, and where you can apply it topically and anywhere that's painful. The tincture that you can take orally, and that's more potent because it bypasses the liver. And then magnesium is something that I recommend all the time because it's a mineral that 75% of us are depleted in, because it's one of our electrolyte minerals like potassium, sodium. And so when we're stressed or exercising a lot, we just burn through these minerals. So if you have magnesium as being a part of these electrolyte minerals and you're really stressed or you're exercising a lot, you're not going to benefit from that magnesium when you need it, which is when you have your period, because that helps calm down the pain and reduce the inflammation that can exacerbate pain. So that would be something that I would recommend including in that toolkit. So something like magnesium glycinate, because there are lots of different forms of magnesium. TENS machines. So if you're not familiar with that, there are these machines that you can put on like your abdomen or anywhere that's painful, and it uses electrical stimulation to disrupt the signals, the pain signals. And that, for my clients with endometriosis, those are incredible because it means that they're not bedbound on day 1 and day 2 of their period, especially. And then other things like, those would be like kind of the short term. Heat is also really helpful. So like hot water bottles, baths, but then also taking a long-term approach as well. So you have your pain toolkit that you can use in the moment, but also adding in anti-inflammatory foods, super helpful for the short and the long term. So something like omega-3 fatty acids, which we get from oily fish, very, very helpful for reducing inflammation. And you can get those from like salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, haddock. I use the acronym SMASH: salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, herring, haddock, and trout. I had a thing there. And those are incredible because we don't actually make omega-3 fatty acids ourselves. We have to get them from food. So adding in those types of fish 3 to 4 times a week is incredibly helpful. And of course, there's other foods that we can add in, but I don't want to take up too much time talking.
No, it's fine, actually. You actually segued in quite nice, actually, because I think the next question I was going to ask was around nutrition and the importance of nutrition with hormones and the menstrual cycle. So I know you've touched on fatty acids and omega-3. What other things, as a nutritionist, would you be recommending to women who maybe have tough periods or intense pain, or actually how to even better manage the secretion or production of hormones during the ovulation and the whole menstrual process?
Yeah, so I think what's really important, just kind of taking it back, is to remember that nutrition, the food we eat, is the scaffolding for our hormones. So for men as well. So something like testosterone, which is important for women and for men, it's a fatty hormone. So it's a steroid hormone. So it's made from cholesterol, fat. So we need to include fat in our diet in order to make these hormones. But a nutrient like zinc, for example, it's an antioxidant mineral. And it's so important for making progesterone and for making testosterone. And so adding in foods with zinc will be really, really helpful for supporting the production of these hormones, but also supporting ovulation in general. So pumpkin seeds, organic red meat, oysters, seafood in general, and shellfish in general, great source of zinc. But also remembering that we have to eat. So I see a lot of conversation around intermittent fasting, and the research around intermittent fasting has majority been done either on postmenopausal women who no longer have a menstrual cycle, and on men. So that research, it doesn't take into account the rise and fall of these different hormones across the menstrual cycle and the need for food to make these hormones, but also to support other aspects of menstrual health. And so I never recommend intermittent fasting to any of my clients who are menstruating, because it can actually mess up hormones in a really major way, because some people, they take it too far. So it's like we naturally fast. So if you're eating breakfast, lunch, dinner, and you stop with dinner, you're naturally having this overnight fast. But then I see people taking it into these small windows, like 16/8, or just even further, like 24, really small eating windows. And it can be really interesting if you're postmenopausal, because your hormonal profile is more similar to men at that point. But when you're menstruating, it can be a disaster for hormones. So my message would be to skip the intermittent fasting if you have a period and you're listening to this, and just really focus on making each meal as nourishing as possible. So you have your breakfast, your lunch, and dinner, getting enough fat, getting enough protein, adding in these types of vegetables called cruciferous vegetables. So broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, kale, kohlrabi. They're really beneficial for the way that we break down our hormones in our liver and our gut. Also, making your plate as brightly colored as possible, because all of those colors contain antioxidants. So we talked about antioxidants earlier. We get those from the food that we eat. And yeah, I just think that nutrition has such a massive impact on our health, and people, I think people can be really dismissive about what they eat, and they focus a lot on, oh, well, I'm just going to exercise and that will make a difference. But something I think is really important to remember is that you eat 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, 21 different opportunities to add in foods that have a massive impact on so many aspects of your health, including menstrual and hormone health.
Wow.
Obviously, this is excellent insights to how to manage the menstrual cycle, and particularly the pain side of things during periods. How important is it to really implement all of this? Because what are the risks, should we say, if someone isn't looking after their body during this period?
Well, I think that's a really good question. So something that I heard the other day, and I've heard this before, is this women saying, well, I only have 2 good weeks every month, every menstrual month. So the week after their period finishes, when they ovulate, and that's it. So if you have, say you have 4 weeks in your menstrual cycle, if you have, you're saying you only have 2 good weeks every month, what a shame is it to be able to have to say, well, I just have these 2 crap weeks, and that's just the way that it is. And it doesn't have to be this way. Going back to what we talked about earlier around myths and misconceptions around menstrual health and hormones, culturally we learn that periods are supposed to be painful. You're supposed to be a mess in the week before your period. So women they PMS and they're moody cows, and that's just the way it is. It really doesn't have to be that way. And so if you're eating anyway, right? Everyone has to eat. And so taking an approach of addition rather than subtraction, and just thinking, what can I add into this meal? How can I do this in the easiest way possible, the path of least resistance? So I'm already going to eat, chicken, for example. What are my veg? So what can I add in a bit of broccoli? Asparagus is in season right now. Can I add in a bit of asparagus? What am I going to cook this chicken in? Throw on a bit of olive oil. What are the spices? What are the things I'm adding in, rather than, I'm not going to eat this, I'm not going to eat that, because that gets you to a place where you're moving away from restriction, which is, as women, so many women, even though there's talk of anti-diet culture and all of that now, so many women, they talk about, I'm being good, I'm being bad, or, I'm saving my calories for dinner, which is a place that you're just focusing so much on food. And I would love for women to move away from that and focus on just what they can add in. And then they'll see the benefits for their health. I think I answered your question in a really roundabout way.
No, you did. Thank you.
Lenice, I know you earlier you mentioned about the pain kit that you really recommend for women to have for their periods, and I know you mentioned CBD within that. It would be good to quickly touch on, I guess, CBD as a whole and the benefits of it for women in general, and for those that go through their menstrual cycles, whether that's through heavy periods or even those who are perimenopausal or going through menopause, because I guess there's a plethora of benefits that can come with CBD, such as the anxiety and the stress. We were saying that some of our consumers talk to us about the hot flushes that they can experience sometimes, or the difficulty going to sleep. So it will just be good, I guess, for people maybe who are listening to this and don't maybe use CBD now yet, or they want to try it and are kind of thinking what would be the overall benefits. Is it just for pain when you use it, or are there other things as well? There are some benefits that you experience, or you know?
No, there's other reasons that I would recommend it. So pain is a big one because it's so anti-inflammatory. But what's really interesting about CBD is that the research is starting to catch up to the anecdotal usage of CBD. And what we're starting to see is people starting to make this delineation between CBD and THC, and realizing that actually they're two different things. You know, you won't get high if you use a product, a CBD product, and then being able to see that, okay, yes, it's really helpful for pain, but it's also really helpful for calming the nervous system, which is really important if you're experiencing anxiety. Really helpful for supporting sleep and getting into that deeper, more restful sleep, which women going through perimenopause and then postmenopausal women, they struggle. That's one of the major symptoms. Like, that's probably the number 2 symptom I see, issues around sleep. And so it's being able to say that, okay, here are lots of different things that you can try, including CBD, to help you get a more restful night's sleep. You might not sleep 7-8 hours, but those hours that you do sleep can be more restful. And that's where CBD can be really helpful. There's some research that I was looking at the other day around CBD and endometriosis. And what's really interesting about endometriosis is it's a whole body condition. So most people think about endometriosis and pain because that's like the number 1 symptom. But digestive symptoms are a big part of endometriosis. And the studies that I was looking at was talking about the effectiveness of CBD for the digestive symptoms of endometriosis, and just having better digestion. Kind of, I guess it's that same thing that I talked about earlier, calming the digestive system so that it can go a little bit easier. But I think the research is starting to catch up around CBD, and we're going to definitely see more and more usage of it, probably in the medical field. I think right now, you probably know this better than I do, there's a lot of skepticism around CBD. It's seen as a trend, but I think the more research, the better, and the more research that incorporates menstruating women, the better, because anecdotally, CBD is an incredible tool for anxiety, pain, digestive symptoms, sleep, hot flashes as well.
Yeah, and I like where you discuss the importance of more and more case studies to kind of prove this. And I think when we talk of that, that's links in with support, being able to support women the way they should be supported, because it sounds like you guys are champions of a lot of things and you guys help so much. But I guess even for me and David sitting here and other men who may be watching this podcast or listening to this podcast, who maybe they have a spouse or they have a family member who is female or even a colleague or whatever, why do you think it's important for us as men to be able to be in on this conversation and listen to things like this?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, 50% of the population will have a period for about 40 years of their life. And so for men to be able to understand just biologically what's going on is really important, because I think there needs to be a bit more maturity around this. You know, I hear a lot of men, they're quite squeamish about, oh, periods are gross and blood and but I think that's actually very immature, because, you know, they wouldn't hesitate to watch a horror movie with, like, you know, blood and gore. But and also knowing that they might have daughters as well. And, you know, you shouldn't wait to change your mindset until you have a daughter, you know, but when you have a daughter, being able to be in a place where you can say, okay, whatever you need, I'll go get it for you, and being able to say, okay, you know, you don't need to live with this. Your period is really painful, or it's really heavy, or it's gone missing. Let's sort this out, where it's not just on the, like, mom's shoulders. And just knowing that these things that we accept as normal, like PMS or PMT, aren't normal, and just moving away from these things. Oh, she's moody because she has her period, or she's hormonal. It's just, being able to just have this more maturity around talking about these things. And if something's going really wrong, being able to be supportive and say, actually, maybe you should look into this. Because what I've seen with some of my clients is that it was actually their boyfriends or their husbands who said, this isn't right. You're on the floor every month with your period. You can't get out of bed. We need to go get this sorted out, because the women had just accepted it as normal. And it was their partners who had said, no, we need to sort this.
And I think conversations like this and conversations all over the world that happen every day is what's important in kind of pushing that forward and enabling those conversations as well in safe spaces and educated spaces.
Yeah.
So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Denise. It's vitally important as well, I think, especially for relationships, especially because as time goes by, menopause will affect how a woman may potentially feel and behave. So a husband, for example, or a long-term partner could suddenly look at that and be confused as to why they're suddenly changing their behaviour. So I think having better insight and education as to how that might affect their partner and why they might be suddenly acting different to how they were when, say, you first met, or the first 5-10 years of your relationship, I think is vitally important.
That's such a good point around menopause and perimenopause, because women, they all of a sudden, they just don't feel like themselves anymore. And I think there's what you said around their husbands or partners being really supportive and saying, I know, things are tough at the moment, but I'll be there for you. But also being able to say, this isn't you. We need to figure out what's going on. Because for some women, perimenopause and menopause, it can be so dramatic in terms of the symptoms that they experience. Brain fog, lack of concentration, anxiety, rage is a big one. Some women even go as far as like suicidal ideation. So to have a partner that is supportive and who can say, okay, we need to go to the doctor and get this figured out, and I will come with you. Because I don't want to go too far on a tangent on this, but some women, when they go to the doctor, they often feel dismissed. And as annoying as it is, when their partners are with them, their male partners, they often get better treatment. So that knowledge is really important, just to kind of be able to be as supportive as possible in all situations.
Mm-hmm. Well, for our community who want to find out more, Lenise, from yourself around everything we discussed, from nutrition to periods and menopause, where can they find you on social media?
Yeah, so you can find me on all of my socials are at Eat, Love, Move. TikTok is a fun and interesting one for me right now. My website is www.eatlovemove.com. And then you can pick up a copy of my book, which is on Amazon, anywhere you buy books online. It's You Can Have a Better Period. And in the book, I break down all 4 phases of the menstrual cycle and get into all of the different conditions. So PCOS, endometriosis, adenomyosis, fibroids, all of it. And then my podcast is Period Story, and that's available anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Awesome. Well, Denise, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here today. I've learned so much, I'm sure. And I'm sure the viewers who are watching have also learned so much as well. So thanks so much for your time, and thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Denise.